أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In this section, we'll talk about how to read a research paper. And while reading, how do you store information that you read in a research paper onto an Excel sheet that you can later use for your literature review or writing your own research paper or maybe research thesis. If you intend to record information, there are a lot of things that you can record. But primarily, what you should focus on is these or are these. We should focus on the title, the objectives of the study, the research questions, hypothesis, the theory that they have focused on, the independent, dependent, control, mediator, moderating variables, and how they are defined as well. An important thing is why a particular research was conducted, why there was a focus on a particular topic, why a particular area was studied, what gaps did that particular research paper focused on, what was the sample size of this study, who were the respondents, what were the results, and at the end, an important thing is how and what were the limitations what were the limitations of that particular research, and how did they want the future researchers to conduct their research in that particular area. What were their future research directions? So these are the things that one should consider while reading a research paper. Now, I've selected a very few research papers that are focused on the area of servant leadership and the outcomes of servant leadership. One of them is focused on the antecedents of servant leadership, how different factors, how different variables influence the concept of servant leadership. So we'll use those research papers, or we'll read one of them or maybe two and see how a research paper should be read. And where do we find this information in a research paper? Where are the objectives? Where are the hypotheses? Where is the theory? And which section talks about the variables? Where are the definitions? Where are the limitations and future research directions? So we'll be talking about these in detail. Now, if we go to our research papers, let's say here is one. Examining the effects of servant leadership on life satisfaction. Now, this was published in Applied Research in Quality of Life Journal. It was written by Amir Ali Chuftai. When you start a research paper, when you look at the research paper, the first thing you see is the title, then you see author or authors, then some relevant information pertinent to the paper, when it was received by the journal, when it was reviewed, when the revisions were made, and when it was accepted. Following this, you will have abstract. Now, abstract is the summary of the research paper. Now, an abstract has a certain section. There are few elements that should be part of any abstract written. There are four most important. The first is the purpose of this study. You start your abstract with the purpose of this study. So if you are recording an information, or if you are recording the information from your research paper or from a research paper that you have downloaded, you can easily copy the objective of the study from the abstract, because the first thing in the abstract is the objective of the study. So in this case, the objective is this. The paper explored the effects of servant leadership on employees' life satisfaction. In addition, it examined the mediating role of work engagement and organizational-based self-esteem in this relationship. So this is the objectives of this. This is the objective, and these are the objectives of the study. Primarily, we can say that there are two objectives. The first one being studying the impact of servant leadership on life satisfaction. And while studying this relationship, the research also focuses on how two variables mediate this relationship. While talking about mediation, it obviously helps us understand how an independent variable actually impacts the dependent variable. So we can easily copy this information and paste it onto our Excel sheet. It's better to just double click it so the cursor becomes visible, or then you press Control V and the information is added. Now, there is other information that should have been added as well. So in order to do that, let's add a serial number. This is paper 1. Now let's add the title of the paper. The title of the paper is Examining the Effects of Servant Leadership on Life Satisfaction. So we add our title here. So what are the research questions or hypotheses that this particular study wants to assess or wants to check? Now, if you go to the research paper, these are obviously available in the literature review section. So we can easily, and sometimes you will see these research questions in the introduction as well, but not all papers present their research questions. Obviously, a research thesis will have clear sections on research objectives, research questions. But since a research paper is very limited in space, it has to be very focused, very concise, very concrete, and very clear. That's why they do not propose separate problem statement, research objectives, research questions, and then hypothesis. If one reads through the hypothesis, he or she would understand what are the research questions. Because obviously, from your problem statement, you get your research objectives. From your research objectives, you get your research questions. And based on your research questions, you drop your hypothesis. So this is pretty normal. So you won't see research questions in all of the papers, but sometimes in some research papers, yes, the research questions are there. We might have a look at a few as well. Now, if we come down to this section, literature review and hypothesis development, we can see the hypothesis. Now, this is the framework. Now, you can obviously draw hypothesis from this framework. But let's see if they have already provided one. Yes, they have provided a few hypotheses. So their H1 is, and if we can just copy it, copy one from here, and just paste it onto our Excel sheet. So this is their H1. Similarly, now we can go for and identify all other hypotheses in the paper as well. This was H1. Now this is H2. Now we can have H3 as well, H4. So here is H3. So on and so forth. You can copy all these hypotheses. I'm just going to leave it here because then we'll be copying only hypothesis. Okay, let's see. Okay, there is there's this fourth hypothesis, and then there is mediation hypothesis as well. So there are in total 5 hypotheses, and you can just copy and paste them onto the Excel sheet. This will help you understand what relationships that the existing research has already evaluated. So in order to, or when you are proposing your own study, you obviously are focused that, okay, these relationships have been evaluated. And then in the results section, you obviously focus that whether or not these hypotheses were substantiated, supported or not. So this will help you in writing your own study. Now the next phase is theory. Now in management research, theory holds a central importance. Whenever you are writing your own literature and whenever you are proposing your own hypothesis, obviously you have to base it on certain theory. How and why certain variables are related with each other is actually based on existing theory. If you fail to base your relationship or how different variables are related with each other on existing theory, your research obviously appears weak. You have to support your argument through theory. And then you have to build your argument. You have to build a theory to support your arguments, that how different variables are related with each other. For the sake of this session, we are only going to focus on the identification of the theory. And in future, obviously, we will discuss how theory is used to explain or elucidate the relationship between variables. Not all papers will have explicit mention of a theory, but some papers will definitely have an explicit mention of the theory. It's always a good idea to explicitly mention the theory that is utilized to explain the relationship between variables. This also helps in explaining your contribution to the theory. What are the theoretical contribution of your study? So where is this theory? So we come back to the research paper. And if you look at this research paper, and what we can do is, or what we need to do is, we just need to press Control F. And let's say if they used any theory. Well, yes, the word theory has been used at least 9 times. So let's see which theory has been used. Okay. So they have mentioned the implications of the theory, but not an explicit theory. Thus, in order to address this gap and advance theory and research in this area, so they have just focused on the general word theory that they are, or theory that they are focusing to advance what is already known about these variables. They haven't mentioned a particular theory. Yes, now they have mentioned a theory. So where is this mentioned? It's mentioned in the servant leadership and work engagement section. It's mentioned in the literature review, where they are expressing how one particular variable is linked to another particular variable. In the present study, it is argued that servant leadership will enhance employees' engagement with their work. The theoretical link between these two constructs can be explained through the lens of social exchange theory. Now, this is the theory or theory that they are using to explain the relationship between servant leadership and work engagement. Now, this is not just enough that we write that, okay, this is the theory that you are going to use to explain the relationship. It's extremely important that you mention what is this theory and how this theory will help in explaining the relationship between these two variables. Failure to do so will obviously won't help you or help your research. It won't add a value in your research. Your research won't be able to create an impact. And obviously there will be issues related to quality of your research that we have discussed in detail in the hallmarks of scientific research. So what they do is, once they have identified the theory, the first thing that they do is they explain what the theory means and who presented the theory. The main premise of this theory is that employees who are treated favorably by their leaders feel obligated to return the favorable treatment in some adequate manner. So social exchange theory means that if the organizational leadership does good for you, you return the favor. And in this case, how servant leadership helps explain work engagement is that when the leader is servant oriented, if the leader is humble, if the leader is focused on the followers will return the favor by being more engaged in their work. Now, what servant leaders do is that servant leaders empower their subordinates. They provide them support and encourage them and facilitate them. And according to social exchange theory, such positive actions on part of the leader might inspire employees to reciprocate by showing greater energy, passion enthusiasm in their work. And this is what we normally refer to as work engagement. So you are more engaged, you are more focused, you show much zeal and energy and passion in your work. So this is how you use a theory to relate different variables. Now let's write that, okay, this theory was used in this particular study. So theory was social exchange theory. What were the independent, dependent, control, mediator, and if any moderator variables? So if you go into the model, this is easily visible in the model or the theoretical framework or the conceptual framework of the study. So if we go into the schematic diagram, if you look here, this actually clearly elaborates what is independent variable. In this case, this is our independent variable. In this case, this is our mediator. This is the other mediator, and this is the dependent variable. So independent variable affects the mediating variable, and the mediating variable then affects the dependent variable. So let's write about our variables. So the independent variable was servant leadership. The dependent variable was life satisfaction. There were no control variables mentioned in the model, but there were two mediators. One was work engagement, and the other one was, there were no moderators, so we leave it blank. Let's write none here. There's one important thing that one should do. It's always a good idea that when you are writing the theory, you add a brief definition of the theory as well, so that when you are referring back to your Excel sheet, you know what this actually means. You do not have to go back to the literature and search for what this actually means. So, or same goes for these variables. Let's say, where do you find these definitions? Primarily, you will find these definitions in your paper in the literature review section. So, what is servant leadership? So, you need a definition. So, recently this was coined or used, or recently it has gathered much research attention. But this is the definition primarily. Focusing on developing employees to their fullest potential in the areas of task effectiveness, community stewardship, self-motivation, and future leadership capabilities. So this is how they have defined servant leadership in their research. And this is the definition they have used. They have used the definition of Liddon and others. Et al. Means and others. So there are more than maybe 3 or 4 authors in this paper. So they've used et al. So what we can do is we can just copy this definition from here and we can paste it over here. So this is how they have defined servant leadership. And as in management, there could be multiple definitions for a single concept. And this is pretty normal. So you use a definition that you think is more suitable in your study. We'll be talking about this later, but for now, let's focus on collecting the definitions. Same goes for life satisfaction. Let's see if there is a definition of life satisfaction or not. So we go back to our research paper. So work engagement. Now this is the definition of work engagement. Trofali 2002, and let's just copy it from here and just paste it here. So this is the definition of work engagement. Now moving on, and let's see if we've got a definition of life satisfaction. You might find the definition of organizational based self-esteem here. Okay, here it is. OBSE, Organizational Based Self-Esteem, Pearson Gardner. So we can just copy it from here and put it here. So now when you are writing your own research paper with all these definitions in there, so it will help you write your own literature in a very quicker manner. And you don't have to go back searching the research paper, searching different material and finding the definition. You already have these in this Excel sheet. You just have to copy them and use them. And we are now left with the definition of life satisfaction. So we go to life satisfaction and search for our definition of life satisfaction. Okay, and okay, there is none here, but let's see if okay, there's none here as well. So they did not propose any particular definition for life satisfaction, just like they did for other variables. So that could be referred to as a weakness of this study. But now this is published in a very good journal. So obviously sometimes the variables by their name are very clear, so they do not need a definition. So that might be the case in this particular study. So okay, now that we have got our definitions, the next step is, and a very important step is, value of the topic. Now we are going to go into further detail as to how to read your research paper. Now, if we go back to the research paper and go right at the start of the paper, and let's see the introduction. So, no matter what research paper you read, a research paper will start its introduction with the value, with the need of the topic. Why a particular topic, a particular area should be studied. Now, in this case, the research is focused on examining the effects of servant leadership on life satisfaction. So the research paper will start with, or has started with, the recent movements towards positive psychology has generated a significant amount of interest in the concept of life satisfaction. Now they are focused on life satisfaction. So this research paper is actually starting their debate with the value, with the need to study life satisfaction. And this is what you will see in all the papers. A research paper will start with the value and the need of the topic, the need to study the topic. For instance, this is one paper. Let's go to another paper. Let's go to maybe this paper. Now, in this paper, the authors have started their debate with servant leadership. So this paper is focused on servant leadership. So that's why they have started with servant leadership. But sometimes, let's say, again going back to the other paper, this paper actually focused on starting the debate with the dependent variable, focusing on the value, the need to study the criterion variable. That might not be always the case. A research may have independent mediators and dependent variable, but they might start the debate with the focus on independent variable as to why an independent variable, or as to why a particular variable must be studied. That's quite possible. In this case, they have started the debate with the dependent variable. And in this case, although their model is on servant leadership, career satisfaction, and life satisfaction, this is their model, but they haven't started the debate on life satisfaction. They've started it on servant leadership. So that's quite possible. And that is guided by the focus of the study or the need of the study. Or you see that, okay, servant leadership is a more stronger variable to focus on. So in this case, they have started with servant leadership is a holistic leadership approach focusing on follower development in ethical, rational, emotional, relational, and spiritual dimensions. The objective is to bring out the best in the employees. For this reason, servant leadership has got an increased prominence in both theory and practice. This is because servant leaders go beyond self-interest and entirely concentrate on addressing the followers' requirement. So this is the value of the study, or the value of the topic, value of the area. And in this case, the other paper, they are focused on life satisfaction. The need to study life satisfaction, the value of life satisfaction. So it's always a good idea to keep a record of how they express the value of research. This is important because this is the start of your study. And it is the first impression that you are going to make on the reader. And before it gets to the reader, the reviewers of your study, the examiners, the supervisor. So it's always a good idea to understand how one should start a particular topic or writing about a particular topic. In this case, let's say this is the value of research. This is how they express the value of research. Now, it's always a good idea to keep a copy of this. The reason being that if you read through your Excel sheet or wherever you have kept the record of these papers, you will understand how one could express the value of a particular topic. Reading through all these papers, reading through all these expressions will give you an idea how you could express your topic. So it will help you improve your own writing ability as well. So let's say we copy this and we put it into our Excel sheet. So this is how they express their value. Obviously, you can arrange the Excel sheet, the text in the cells later to take minimum space. And okay, so moving on. The next is, what gaps did they address? So if you go back to the paper here, so obviously if this is a research, this is a published research, they would have expressed certain gaps. They would have obviously addressed certain gaps. They would have addressed certain limitations in existing research. So what limitations did they address? So, okay, research has shown that life satisfaction is related to an impressive range of social, health, and organizational outcomes. This is how life satisfaction is related to different outcomes. Now, if we go down, now this is what we are looking forward to. The role of leader in enhancing life satisfaction has received scant empirical attention. So there is very limited research on the role of leadership in life satisfaction. And this is the argument of the author. Now, how is he supporting his argument? Because there is no reference here. So whenever you are giving your argument, you have to support your argument with references. So these are the references. This is a reference. As noted above, currently not much is known about how leaders influence their followers' life satisfaction. In order to address this gap and advance theory and research in this area, the present study attempts to examine the impact of servant leadership on employees' life satisfaction. Okay, so let's say this is the gap they are addressing. There are multiple gaps. You can copy them separately. For now, let's copy this. So we put it in here. And similarly, let's copy some other gaps as well. Obviously, you can use these gaps in your study as well, in your introduction. For example, I can easily use this with the reference of Choftai 2018. It's a very latest reference. In my own study, when I am studying or when I am focusing on the role of maybe if I am studying life satisfaction. So this is a very latest reference that can be used. So this is how you copy the gaps they have addressed. And you can use these gaps if they are latest. What is the sample size? Who are the respondents of the study? Now, you find this information here in the methodology section. So this was cross-sectional survey from manufacturing company based in Pakistan. The sample size was 160. So you just copy this information into your Excel sheet. The sample size was 160 and the respondents were from a tractor company. The next thing you are looking into is or are the results. Now, it's really easy to find the results. You just have to go to the abstract again. And in the abstract, you will find and see there are the respondents and the company is also available in the abstract. So you can copy that information from the abstract as well. Okay, now here are the results. So you just copy these results. So you can use these results in your study when you are writing the literature to establish how different variables could be related. And when you are writing the discussion section, whether or not the relationship that you have established were established previously or not. So you can just go to Excel sheet and just copy this information into a results section. And the final and most important thing, where they finished or concluded their research, they would have mentioned how this research can be taken forward or moved forward. So in order to do this, every research paper will have a section on limitations and future research direction. And that will be at the end of the research paper, where they conclude their study. Now, if we go towards the end, this is limitations and future research directions. So we are interested in how to take this research forward in terms of establishing new relationship. And we have already talked about this in other videos as well, and that we are not focusing, or actually it's a very vague research that, okay, in this sector, the relationship is significant. Let's check this in another sector. And if you're not using or the research to establish new relationship, this is always a weaker research. For the present study exclusively focused on examining impact of servant leadership on life satisfaction. However, to acquire a deeper insight into the relationship between leader behavior and life satisfaction, future research in this area should also investigate other leadership styles. So obviously you can use this research, use this model and add other leadership styles and focus them onto how they impact life satisfaction. So you can copy this. And you can also copy this further information. So let's copy all of this, where they have proposed other variables as well. So you copy this into this section here. You can arrange this later as well. Now this is one paper is done. Now once it's done, you can obviously start focusing on the other paper. And this is how you keep collecting the information. This is how you focus on collecting the information and adding this information into your Excel sheet. So once this Excel sheet is ready, now we are going to focus on or further focus on how you may start writing. For instance, again, let's see this paper. Now, again, they have started with the value of research. Why this particular research is important? So they have started on, or they have focused on servant leadership. The next is, what gaps are prevalent in existing research? Same is the case with another research here. If we look at this, after establishing the value of the study, what they are focused is on research on servant leadership has primarily focused on business organizations with relatively scarce research in context of higher education. Now, once you establish the value of your study, the next step is identifying the gaps, the limitations of the studies. And this Excel sheet that you have built will obviously help you identify the gaps in existing research. You can use this argument that previous studies have focused on the impact of servant leadership on life satisfaction. But existing research has asked for inclusion of other leadership styles and evaluating their impact on life satisfaction. You can use this argument that they have used, that the role of leadership in enhancing employee life satisfaction has received scant empirical attention. So you can use these arguments when expressing your own or the gaps prevalent in existing research and giving a guideline about your research. Why is it important to study higher education institution? And why is leadership important in higher education institution? Now you are giving legitimacy to your research. You are expressing as to why this research is important. Now, going further, now see this paragraph again talking about the gaps. So this is how you express the gaps or limitations in existing research. Now that we have understood how to record information from a research paper, let's focus on reading a research paper. Now that we have discussed that you start a research paper by identifying the value of a particular area or value of the area in general in the management or in business research or in management research. Now, if we look at this paper actually starts with identifying the value or the importance of starting servant leadership. Now, the first paragraph is on why servant leadership. What's different, why it is important. The second paragraph now, or the third paragraph might be, if you want to further elaborate, the next thing you do is you start identifying the gaps and limitations in existing research, just as done in this research paper. This research paper now talks about how research on servant leadership is limited and why it should be started in maybe other sectors. In this case, now they are focused on higher education institutions. And continuing in the same breath, now they talk about further gaps or further limitations of existing research. Because the focus of this study is actually on development of a scale to measure servant leadership in higher education. First, what they have done is they have identified that the research on servant leadership in higher education is significantly limited and why it should be started. So it's not enough that you just write on, okay, this research is limited. So obviously it is limited, and if it is limited, why it should be further enhanced? Why one should conduct research in this particular area? Following this, the next step is you further elaborate on the gaps. In this case, the study is focused on scale development. So this particular paragraph or this section now starts to focus on why there is a need to study or develop scale pertinent to servant leadership and what are the limitations of the existing skills. So, in spite of frequent indications in management research for development of context-dependent scale, now research has called for, or existing research has called for, context-dependent scale. For instance, what do you mean by context-dependent scale? That for higher education, if you are to measure a particular concept in higher education, they should have their own scale. If you want to measure it in maybe corporations, they should have their own scale. And similarly, now the author is proving that there is very limited research. For instance, through extensive search and peer-reviewed databases, the authors could not find a scale to measure servant leadership behavior in higher education. This is evident in the contextual analysis which found that servant leadership theory is being mainly applied in school settings, not in higher education. Further elaborating, obviously the authors further elaborate. Now, where does the author find these gaps? How did he find this zoo? Obviously, when you search existing databases, you come across these tables, these papers. And when you read through those papers, just as we identified from that Chughtai paper, the gaps in existing research or their recommendations for future research, use that particular information in our introduction, in our research. So I read Zhu's paper, and in that paper, there was this statement that additionally, the servant leadership has been mainly adopted in the business domain. Moreover, the theoretical and empirical studies of servant leadership are still relatively short. More empirical studies are required to further define, measure, and validate servant leadership. So once you search databases, you find this information in either their introduction, when they are writing their introduction, and maybe in their limitations and future research direction. And from there, you can use this information in your own research to elaborate the gaps and limitations in your study. Now, moving further, again, this paragraph is context specific. focusing on the need to study servant leadership in higher education. Now, having done that, having established the need to study servant leadership in higher education, the step is elaborate on the gaps and limitations of existing research. How do you do that? Once you have filled that Excel sheet, once you have identified the gaps and limitation in existing research, once you have identified what existing researchers have proposed for future research, the next step is writing about those gaps with references through support. Now, if you read this, so according to Van Darendonck and others, 2014, servant leadership research is in a relatively early stage and is significantly limited. Again, how did you get this information? So when you search through the databases, you come across these papers. When you read their introduction, when you read their limitations and future research direction, they would have mentioned these things. So you keep that information in the Excel sheet. And when you are writing your own paper, you just copy that information in here and start writing it. Now, how do you write it? This is how you write these things. Now, how do you get acquainted how to write? Read, read, and read. The more you read, the more you understand how to write. Similarly, keep reading this paragraph, and this calls for, again, we've given the reference of Chughtai 2018, the paper we just read. And what did Chughtai said? Chughtai said that we have to include other mediators. Moreover, inclusion of variables as mediators can further explain the mechanisms through which servant leadership impacts on different employee-related outcomes. This was already there in the limitations and future research directions. So what we did, we just copied that information in here and gave a reference to further support our argument. Now, we are not just focusing on servant leadership. This study focuses on other variables as well. So when you download research papers pertinent to other variables, like career and life satisfaction, those variables will have their own limitations. And you can use those limitations pertinent to your study. For instance, they have mentioned that career satisfaction could serve as a useful mediating role in explaining the mechanism of impact of servant leadership on life satisfaction. So, further, Chughtai has also, okay, now Chughtai asked for the inclusion of the variable, so this is already mentioned. Now, additionally, research in area of life satisfaction has been criticized due to its lack of focus on work, domain, organizational settings, and has primarily focused on non-working samples, for instance, students, adolescents, children, and people having health issues. So now you are actually targeting that life satisfaction is limited. The research on on life satisfaction is limited, and it has not focused on work, domain, or organizational settings. And higher education institutions or higher education or universities are key organizations that work in our society. So when you read through these papers, you identify the limitations from their introduction, from their limitations and future research directions. And then you use that text in writing your own introduction. How do you do it? This is how you do it. So once you have explained all these gaps and limitations of existing research, once you have identified how existing research is limited, once you have identified these are the weaknesses, rather than weaknesses, we should use the word gaps, limitations, shortcomings maybe of the existing research. The next step is, you have expressed all these things. The next step is, what are the contributions of your study? So how do you mention the contributions of this study or your study? It's important that once you have highlighted the limitations and gaps of the existing research like this, and same goes for other studies as well. Like for instance, let's see this paper. Now this paper obviously starts with the role of servant leadership. Once done, this paper talks about, or let's go through this particular paragraph. Eva et al. 2019 proposed a categorization of servant leadership research into 3 stages. The first focused on conceptual development, second on developing and validating measures, and the third, till present, focusing on complex model development. Currently in the third phase, some studies include different variables as mediators or moderators to further explain the mechanism through which servant leadership impacts on different employee outcomes. The present study takes career satisfaction of mediator and life satisfaction as an outcome variable. Now, what we are doing here is that we are extending the existing research, and we are in the third phase of servant leadership research. And this paragraph, in this statement, what we are doing is we are expressing how existing research can be further elaborated, further extended, and what limitations, what gaps this current or existing research or this research actually is extending. Now, obviously, this research is focused on higher education, so more or less you will see the same text that has been previously mentioned. Same goes for life's career and life satisfaction. You would say, well, okay, this is the similar research. So what they are doing new? So what's new in this research? This is our research. But if you look at it, this research actually focused on one country, Spain. Now we extended our research, or more or less the same text was used, but now the research was extended to other countries as well, China and Pakistan. And this is a significant contribution when you are doing cross-cultural research. So what we did was we extended the research from Spain, and obviously we did change some text as well, and now focused our research on China and Pakistan as well, and did cross-cultural research. So this is how we extended our research, and we did talk about it as well. Why cross-cultural research is important and why there are limitations pertinent to cross-cultural research on servant leadership. And how did we get this information? Obviously reading through latest research. Now going back to our topic, I'm going back to our expression of gaps, limitations. So once you have expressed the gaps, once you have expressed the limitations that you have collected from existing research, the next step is, or the final step in writing your introduction is, you express the contribution of your study. Once you know that these are the gaps, once you know that these are the limitations of existing research, these are the limitations and gaps that you are going to address, the next step is you start writing the contributions like this. The present study attempts to address multiple gaps and in doing so makes important contribution. The first contribution is that this is the first study that provides a conceptualization of servant leadership in higher education settings and develops a multidimensional scale to measure and assess its psychometric properties, making a significant contribution to the existing leadership theory with a valid scale on servant leadership in higher education. So this is the first contribution. The second contribution is assessment of mediating variables. Second, assess the mediating role of career satisfaction between servant leadership and life satisfaction. No previous study, to the best of author's knowledge and through search in peer-reviewed databases, had empirically explored the effects of servant leadership on these two work outcomes in an academic setting. So there have been studies on servant leadership and life satisfaction, but not in higher education. And there is no study, to the best of author's knowledge, on the impact of servant leadership on these two variables in academic settings. So this is a significant contribution. Now, how do we further elaborate that? However, research has shown that servant leadership can increase employee satisfaction with life in settings other than higher education, but not in education. Now, although the impact of servant leadership on career satisfaction is yet to be studied, leadership has been found to significantly impact career satisfaction. Leadership has impacted career satisfaction, but there is no evidence whether servant leadership affects career satisfaction. There might be other leadership styles that can affect career satisfaction. Now, it's important that you mention the theory that you are using. How do you get to know what theory I am using when you search existing research on these databases that you are interested in studying? So once you search these databases that you are that on the variables, on the articles, and focusing on the variable that you are interested in studying, you come across different theories. Then you keep record of those theories. And while you are reading the introduction and literature, you get to know how these theories have been used to express the relationship between variables. And then in your contribution, you mention that based on leader-member exchange theory, this study intends to ascertain the importance of servant leadership in shaping career and life satisfaction. So this research actually uses LMX, leader-member exchange theory, to express the relationship between servant leadership in shaping career and life satisfaction. So this is your theoretical contribution. This is your contribution to the theory. And how do you get to know the theory, that which theory shall I use? So when you collect the articles, you download the articles, and when you're searching through the articles, you will get to know, okay, this article is focused on this variable, and this variable is a key variable in my study. Now, what variable, or what theory have they used to express how this variable is related to other variables? And when you read through this theory, obviously reading will help you understand the conceptualization of the theory. And then you will get to know how you can use that particular theory in your own study. So this is how you read the research paper or the introduction of a research paper. How you identify the value of your research, how do you identify the gaps and limitations of existing research, and how you mention the contribution of your study.